Okay. I'm hitting all the buttons. Okay, cool. We are live. So hi, everybody. Welcome to Reading Between the Lines. I'm Sarah, and I'm joined today by my brother, Aaron.
Hello.
And Aaron came up with a great theme for if you want to join us in the chat live, or if you're listening on the podcast, you can always check out the YouTube recording later on. But grab a cup of tea, a blanket, or whatever it is that makes you feel cozy, and we'll dive in. So just a side note, my brother lives in Ireland and I am in California, so we have a bit of a time difference. It's morning for me and it is going to be evening for him soon. So anyway, Aaron, tell us what our theme is.
Well, okay. Today's theme is swords and sorcery. So anyone who's ever played Dungeons and Dragons or read a Conan the Barbarian novel knows what this genre is about. And you could consider maybe, like old stories like Beowulf, knights fighting monsters as, kind of the genesis of this. But I think really it starts in the 1930s with maybe like the Conan the Barbarian stories, which I think Robert E. Howard began writing in 1932. And then The Hobbit came out in 1937. And so it kind of went from there. There's pulp short story magazines like Weird Tales or Tales of the Unusual would publish these sort of fantastic things. And I think also the guy who wrote the Cthulhu stories, he started around this time too, but unfortunately I don't think his stuff was as appreciated as it is now. Kind of like when Van Gogh was painting, people were like, that's not very good. And now it's like, he's the best painter in the world, so it took away, he was before his time perhaps. But anyway, so what I have also noticed is that there's some books that seem to have inspired, like Gary Gygax, the guy who created Dungeons and Dragons. And then there's other books that were obviously inspired by Dungeons and Dragons afterwards. So it's kind of neat for me to be like I started playing Dungeons and Dragons in the late 70s. That's how old I am. And so it's neat for me to see this genesis of swords and sorcery before and after D&D, sort of like.
I have noticed, so for me, I'm coming from a background where I really wasn't, I don't know, I didn't read a lot of fantasy novels per se, but of course I loved watching when I was a teenager, like anime or movies and things like that. But it was very difficult for me to jump into a lot of these books, which we'll talk about, because they are brand new worlds. There's world building. You have to, suspend, your belief for some of these things. And that was always really hard for me, and also hard for me to keep track of, as I said, all of the characters. But this is not what we're talking about today. Is not going to be like an all-encompassing, like these are the top fantasy books ever, but rather just these are our favorites, because this is such a huge category, of course.
Yeah, it really is. Like the Travis Baldree, the ones with Viv the orc, Bonedust and Bookshops, that's like almost a romance fantasy. And then there's hardcore sword and sorcery like Conan,
So I think of the list that you made and the list that I made, we'll each be talking about 3 that we want to recommend. And I think we are very, very diverse in the type of fantasy that we're recommending.
Yeah, it's funny that this category is just so large. I mean, basically anybody who's got a breastplate and a long sword, and then there's a Gandalf wizard dude, casting fireballs, that's basically okay, that covers it. I mean, it's almost like saying anybody who has a book where there's kissing, that's a romance,
Right, exactly. For those of you who are watching this, the background that I had AI create this morning, I asked it to make the characters look like Aaron and I.
Oh, how funny.
Which Aaron became Gandalf, and I look
Sure.
15 years old now, so that's great.
I like the mushrooms in the background that look a little bit like jellyfish mushrooms, you know. That's
okay, so
creepy.
Aaron, why don't you go ahead and start with your first one?
Okay, so let me fire up old Bessie, the iPad here.
Yeah.
Okay, so swords and sorcery books. Where should we begin? I think either you or Mom gave me Bookshops and Bonedust by Travis Baldree recently for Christmas.
And this is totally a modern book.
It's very modern, published by Tor Books in 2023. I'll read my synopsis here. Actually, this is the second book of this. There's a series, Legends and Lattes was his first one. And I think that was his first novel. And it's interesting to see how he's progressed as a writer. Technically, you could say this is a standalone book. You don't have to read them in order, but this is the second book involving the main character, Viv.
But it's also a prequel.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, you're right. This is kind of before she settles down with her coffee shop. She was a mercenary. So main character named Viv is an orc, and yes, she's green, and she's injured in battle with her mercenary group, and she heals her injured leg in a town called Merk that's near the sea. And in this little beach town, there isn't a lot to do, but she finds an old bookshop on the boardwalk run by a woman named Fern, who is a mouse person. So already we're getting into the
mouse person. Love it.
Mouse people. Yeah, in Legends and Lattes, the first book, their baker at their coffee shop was a mouse, and he was very ratatouille. He was like super good.
Forgot about that. Oh, we're gonna have a theme here today. Just FYI, foreshadowing about mice and creatures. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, interesting. All right. So anyway, she befriends Fern, the mouse woman, and then Fern starts getting her interested in reading. And Viv was never really a big reader as a orc mercenary before, but then she starts realizing she kind of digs books. And then she also meets a gnome thief named Galina, I think at the hotel where Viv is staying. Galina wants to join Viv's mercenary group, and Viv at first is a little bit like, get away from me, kid, you bother me. But she sort of grows on her, and so also Viv starts up a romance with a dwarven woman named Maylee, who has a bakery on the boardwalk near the bookstore. So already it's getting kind of lovey-dovey. It's like cozy. Yeah, that's a really good word, cozy. And so Viv previously, when she was injured, had been fighting an evil necromancer named Vareen. So the Bonedust part of the title refers to a character in the book who is actually a cursed minion of the necromancer Vareen. And this character is a skeleton that becomes animated when Bonedust is sprinkled on him. He lives inside a satchel. Okay, so and somebody steals the satchel from Vivine, and she wants it back, because that's like her butler creature, right? So the creature was stolen from Vivine, and he lives inside a satchel. They bring the satchel inside the bookstore with Fern and Viv do. And they sprinkle the magic bone dust that's in the satchel on the bones, and he comes to life. And so this leather satchel opens up, and this pool of bones starts water falling out of the satchel, and then going like a Jenga tower, and builds himself up into a scorpion. Not a scorpion. I'm sorry, a skeleton. Sorry, don't listen to me. No, he's a skeleton, and he's kind of like imp-sized. So he's obviously like evil. He's made to be an evil minion. The character is really cool because when he becomes alive with the bone dust and he's magically transforming himself into a skeleton, all of his bones have runes written on them in blue glowing letters, kind of like if you remember Lord of the Rings, when they throw the ring into the fire and then one ring that binds them, the inscription on the inside of the ring lights up fire letters. So this dude comes to life, and all of his runes etched into all of his bones turn into blue fire characters. And so he's really cool. And
Does
so
he talk?
he's kind of like, yeah, he talks, and he's like, hello, how may I serve you? And he's like, where am I? And then it turns out He's so totally nice. He was, as if you're reading this, you get the idea that he might have been an old wizard at one time, and then he was kind of put into this skeleton, and it's been so long he doesn't remember really anything except about who he was or anything. But so they're like, well, what's your name? And he's like, it's been so long I don't remember. So they call him Satchel, and that's his name, is Satchel now. And all Satchel wants to do is help organize Fern's bookstore. It's like, oh your
God.
shelves are terribly dusty and messy. Let me help you with that. So he's like a perfect butler. And she's like, well, you're doing so much work. How can I pay you? And he's like, can I please sit in the corner and read some books?
Oh my God.
So he's
a
totally lovable character. And so it turns out that, everybody grows fond of Satchel, and they progress by revamping the bookstore in the story and getting more customers. So Fern gets helped out. And then Vivine's minions come back to, retrieve Satchel. And so they want to save him as well as defeat Vivine. So that's what I liked about that's the plot there. The writing in the story is so much better, I think, than the first book, which didn't seem to have any threat in it. Like the antagonist of Legends and Lattes.
The threat was, is she going to be able to make her business go and be a success or not?
And there was a town kind of, I don't know, mafia. And this lady sort of ran the town as a protection racket. And she's kind of like, okay, well, it would certainly be a shame if your new coffee shop burned down. What will you give me? And then their little mouse friend who makes the bakery confections so good, this mafia kingpin becomes addicted to his croissants and muffins, and so she's like, oh, okay, well, you can just pay me once a week and bring me muffins. I'm like, oh that's easy. Okay, so that's it. Threat over. Yeah. And so there wasn't much, the characters didn't experience much peril in the first book. And in the second book, you started to realize, oh, this Vivine necromancer is really serious business, and they could have a problem. And so there was more of a threat, and that made more of a story.
I did read the first one, and I really appreciate that you explained more about the second one and that the writing is better. Not that the writing is bad in the first one, but I kind of wasn't interested in reading this one because I was like, it was so fluffy, the last one. And
that's it. And this is less fluffy.
The characters were all endearing, but I also there's a little bit of in each of these books a sapphic romance, which I have just talked to Mom about, and I've been reading books about, and I'm just like, I'm done with that. It's just not of interest to me, but it's not a main theme.
No, and it's not as sexual at all in the sense like, this is definitely appropriate for a YA audience. It's kind of like, okay, she likes girls, that's fine. But there's no, graphic lovemaking descriptions. It's just kind of like they went on a date, and that's okay.
So tell us the name of the book and the author again.
Sure. It's called Bookshops and Bonedust, and the author is Travis Baldree, Baldree, publisher Tor Books, 2023.
Cool.
Bookshops.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to
I enjoyed
read
that. Yeah, and so if he writes another one, I'm definitely going to get it on Kindle or physically.
I think he will. I mean, I think this will I don't know if it'll be a series, but I think he'll keep going on with some of these characters that he's created this world. All right.
Yeah.
I'm going to jump into my next one. Okay. And I keep coughing, so I've been muting myself. Okay.
Oh, sorry.
This is one that is similar in genre and not necessarily super cozy, but it is Tress of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson. And Brandon Sanderson, if you're not aware, he is very prolific as a fantasy author. He's also a professor and teaches writing somewhere. He's always known for his very intricate world building and very compelling characters and a very innovative magic system. He's best known for his Mistborn series and the Stormlight Archive series. He's also completed Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time series. And so he's really a very modern fantasy writer who is well known. I have tried to read some of Brandon's books in the past, and again, the world building is too much for me, and there's a lot of characters.
Oh,
However,
yeah.
this book, Tress of the Emerald Sea, is kind of a one-off. As you reminded me about this, Aaron, he wrote this book for his wife when she was ill, and so it was kind of like a bedtime story. A little bit like Princess Bride in that sense, where
Okay, yeah, kind of make it up as you go along, and yeah, that's kind of, and then people liked it. It's almost like, well, the Alice in Wonderland was a
yeah,
story to amuse the girls on a boat ride, and
yes,
they kept going like, oh, tell us more, and he just had
keep
to like
going.
make up more characters,
Well, I'll read the synopsis of this. Tress is a young woman who's lived her whole life on a very tranquil island surrounded by an emerald green ocean. Her days are extremely simple. She loves to collect cups, which is weird. Well, I guess that's not.
You like teacups, don't you?
Yeah, I guess I do. It's not so weird. Anyway,
Ah.
she likes to collect cups. And it's a seaport, obviously, where she's living. She loves to soak up the stories from her friend Charlie, who is her only friend. Everything changes when Charlie is swept away on a voyage with his father to find a bride, and disaster strikes. Tress finds herself leaving the safety of her quiet life behind. She stows away on a ship bound for the deadly midnight sea, and her journey takes her through a spore-filled ocean. Yes, the oceans are not water. Water is very bad in this book. All of the seas are made of spores that are pretty deadly, and there's pirates. And what I liked about this book is that this can be read by a family. It can be read by, kids and grandparents alike. You don't need to be influenced by any of Brandon's myriad books because every book he writes is within the same universe and world that he's created.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So I also, and this is a little silly, but like this is a very kind of a girl power book in that Tress goes to save the boy. However, this is really about embracing the strengths that you have and not trying to be something you're not. And there's fantastic characters, not too many. There is a talking rodent. I don't think it's as cute as the one that you just mentioned.
Yeah.
But this is really a fun mystery. And again, I do love a pirate story. I love a good pirate story. The magic system was also not too difficult to understand. What I did want to say is that first chapter of this book, you got to really just hang on, just get through it. I was like, what in the fudge is going on? The whole concept of a ocean being made of spores in itself.
Yeah, fungus dust ocean was like weird. And then it's like, don't get it wet because then it'll explode and get everybody sick.
Yes. Anyway, super creative and great stuff. So that is Tress of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson, and I highly recommend. A fantastic book.
Excellent. Yeah, you gave me that book, and I've gotten through the first chapter, and then I think I had to, that was in December, and then I flew out to California for Christmas. So I need to pick that back up. Actually, that book is sitting next to my bed right now, so I can do
It's a beautiful cover, too.
Yeah, it's a nice, the hardback is really a nice looking production. Speaking of nice hardbacks, I have a kind of Houghton Mifflin collector's edition of The Hobbit. And I think our grandmother, Shirley Ann, gave me this like in the early 90s. And it's a slipcase, it's really nice,
gold
got runes around the
embossed
side and deckled end papers. It's got J.R.R. Tolkien's own illustrations in it, which are pretty amazing.
I forgot that he
really nice.
illustrated these as well. I mean, golly, what a talent he had.
He was amazing. Yeah. So he actually was a linguistics professor and an old English professor, and he loved learning languages and making up languages. And so this story of Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, he kind of made up his own mythology about the people who would speak those languages, like the elves and the dwarves and all that stuff. So The Hobbit is quite famous. It was originally, I mean, it's a children's story, right? So there's no swearing in it. It's narrated as if Tolkien was reading, his children a bedtime story. Let me see when this came out. Let's see.
Is this
It
his first
was.
book?
Yeah, well, no, it's technically not his first book, because his first book was an academic paper that was a vocabulary companion to another linguistics book, how to
Okay.
decipher. And so it was kind of like, if Grandpa Jack's first book was a something expounding on aluminum fabrication and metallurgy, and then he wrote a fantasy story about dwarves or something.
But yeah.
So technically, I think The Hobbit is Tolkien's second book.
Okay, fair enough.
Which is interesting. But yeah, so he started branching out. Yeah, so let's see. The Hobbit, published in 1937 by George Allen and Unwin. So Tolkien, J.R.R. Tolkien, was a Oxford professor. And it's so funny because I went to Oxford in June to see a concert, and I stayed at a hotel that was, just up the road, a good walk from the city center and, Radcliffe Camera and all that. And I just looked it up, and Tolkien's house was behind the hotel where I stayed. I could have walked around the block and seen, in England, they have the blue plaque that says, J.R.R. Tolkien lived here. I could have seen his house, and it just didn't occur to me. So I was like, oh, I got to go back to that same hotel again. But so anyway, so this is the famous tale of Bilbo Baggins, a comfortable, well-to-do hobbit. And a hobbit is a halfling, semi-failed fairy tale, semi-mankind kind of race. They're kind of like short,
little people,
elfish sort of people, but they don't wear shoes. They have fuzzy toes, and they like waistcoats, and they like sipping their tea, and they like puffing on their pipes, kind of like an Oxford English professor might do. So anyway, this famous tale of Bilbo Baggins, a comfortable, well-to-do hobbit who wants nothing to do with adventures, being forced to go on an adventure by the wise wizard Gandalf. There are 13 dwarves in the party, and Bilbo rounds out the party to make 14. They travel through hills and battle trolls, through mountains and then battle goblins, through forests and they battle giant spiders. They meet elves, and eventually they make their way to a mountain, which was formerly a dwarven city under the mountain, where Smaug, the red dragon, lives, and then they have to defeat Smaug. And so, it's a fantastic story. The story is very child-friendly, and it's narrated as if Tolkien were telling his children an exciting bedtime story. There's no swearing, there's plenty of action, adventure, and definitely magic. All the original races playable in Dungeons and Dragons, by the way, come from this book. So elves and dwarves and halflings and humans. So obviously Gygax was, a fan of The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings too, I'm sure, when he started making Dungeons and Dragons in the early 70s. So, it's a fantastic story, and I think everyone should read it for sure, give it to their kids, and I like having a nice copy of, your favorite books that you can always go back to. And it's kind of like they become part of your library in your living room, and they're with you always.
My stepson Nathan has a very beautiful collection of hardbound books that he's been collecting for his life, just like that. And he's really quite proud of that collection. So it is a treasure.
Oh, sure. Well, it's like, you gave me a really good copy of Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas by Hunter S. Thompson. And that's a Folio Society book. And, I love those folio books because they're all slipcased and hardcover and well manufactured. And they have pride in going out and finding illustrators to, do their special edition. And, they can be a little pricey. But it's definitely you get what you pay for. And if you appreciate good books, then the Folio Society books are nice to have in your library. So what's your next one?
My next one is Nettle and Bone by T. Kingfisher. So this is another modern one. I also wanted to say that I've had a lot of prejudice around fantasy novels and I think that was due to like I just growing up in the 90s. Maybe I thought that like I don't play D&D. That's nerdy. So, but I feel really bad. I feel like maybe I missed out because even now, like today, there's been a recent Dungeons and Dragons movie, which I also was prejudiced about and didn't want to watch, but I did watch it and it was fantastic.
Yeah, it's funny when you have a preconceived notion about something and you avoid it, and then later in life, somebody shows it to you, and you're like, oh, this was actually really cool. I
Yeah.
felt the same way about the band The Stone Roses,
Hmm.
because when they first came out, there was this song, and I thought, well, this is a devil song, because he was singing like, I don't have to sell my soul, he's already in me. And I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, wow, okay, I don't like that, and so I didn't like Stone Roses. And then first year I moved to Ireland, my girlfriend was a big Stone Roses fan, and Stone Roses came to Dublin, and we got our wellies and went out to this festival in the mud and saw them, and I was like, this is really fun, and their drummer's really good, and I don't even care about drummers at all, but I noticed their drummer, it was really fantastic. And so then a couple of years later, they came back and we did the same thing again. We went out to another festival with our
Yeah.
wellies in the mud and listened to them again. And so, you can learn to appreciate something if you see someone else's enthusiasm. It's worth it to
Agreed.
go, okay, well, why are they interested? Why do they like this thing? And maybe give it a chance.
I noticed actually Eva, who's 13, Eva's friend Addie has been going, I think, once a month to like up to, it doesn't matter. She's been playing Dungeons and Dragons once a month,
Okay.
which
Yeah.
I was really surprised about there was a group and that she's been doing this.
Sure.
And she's 13. And I just thought, wow, okay, well,
It's actually the right age to play Dungeons and Dragons. I think I started when I was 8, but it's kind of
Yeah.
it's a kid's game, really. Fantasy stuff. But well, people now, they get more into the relationship aspect of it and the role-playing aspect. And there's some pretty good podcasts of people playing Dungeons and Dragons, and a lot of these are podcasts, and they're by professional voice actors.
Oh gosh, that's
the
cool.
role playing is really good because they do the voice for their character, and they interact with each other in character as if you were watching like an anime movie. These people actually are in anime movies as valid voice
Cool.
actors, and so some of them are pretty fantastic. So
okay. I love that. I think that's interesting. I also realized that there's YouTube channels too dedicated to like tabletop games where you can watch or listen as a podcast to people playing tabletop games.
Yeah.
Who knew? It's a whole world. Anyway.
It is, and it can bring people into the game too, because now they see these voice actors doing a Dungeons and Dragons thing, and they're like, oh my God, this game is so fun. I need to find people to play with.
And I find for me that if I listen to a fantasy book, I get into it more than rather just reading it. So that's, kind of a similar.
That can help too if the person doing the narration of the audiobook can do character voices and kind of make it like a movie in your head. Or it's almost like a radio show, from the 1930s, and it gets you into it. And so that can be a lot of fun. Because otherwise you read these fantasy names and you're like, Drizzt Do'Urden, and what is this? What Mesobarandolin? What was? And then the names are like, no. And then somebody says, no, it's Drizzt Do'Urden from Mesobarandon, and you're like, I would have never got that, So if they pronounce the fantasy names for you, then that's
a whole other topic. Fantasy names are just so exhausting.
Oh yeah, anyway. It is. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to jump to my second book, which is Nettle and Bone by T. Kingfisher. So Nettle and Bone is a 2022 Goodreads Choice Award nominee for Reader's Favorite Fantasy. And just for some background, Kingfisher is an award-winning author. She's really known for her darkly whimsical fantasy and horror novels and novellas. They do blend a little bit of humor and heart, but as we were talking about yesterday, what I love about her writing style is the atmospheric vibes that she gives to everything, which I'll get into in a minute. So let me read the synopsis here. Okay, Mara is actually.
By the way, I really like that phrase you just said, darkly whimsical. That's a
Darkly
little bit like
whimsical.
Neil Gaiman in his American Gods kind of stuff.
Yes. Yes. Okay.
I just read a Neil Gaiman book called Neverwhere, which is about kind of like a sub-London where people fall through the cracks into this kind of semi-magic world. And that's,
That's fun.
darkly whimsical in itself. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, go ahead.
Mara. Mara is a shy and convent-raised youngest daughter of a not very well-to-do, but she's royal. She's from a teeny tiny little royal kingdom that really needs some money. She's not important. She doesn't want to get married. Her parents are like, yeah, fine, you can go to the nunnery. Goodbye. So off she goes. However, she's watched her sisters endure years of torment at the hands of the same abusive prince. When it becomes clear that no one else is going to save her last remaining sister, Mara decides to take matters into her own hands. So she leaves the nunnery. With the help of a very powerful grave witch, she's given the tools to kill the prince, but only if she can first complete 3 impossible tasks. And of course, in stories of princes and witches and unlikely heroes, the impossible is just the beginning. So along the way, Mara teams up with the Grave Witch, a very reluctant fairy godmother, a disillusioned former knight, and yes, a demon-possessed chicken. I forgot about that. The demon-possessed chicken does not talk.
A demon chicken?
Demon chicken. What did you? Oh, I don't want to say that word again, but yeah, it could be. I didn't know that was a
That's
phrase.
A creature in Dungeons and Dragons. I think its gaze can turn you to stone.
Okay, so that's not an original concept. I didn't know that.
Well, it's fun reading stories like this because then, as a writer myself, an amateur writer, I can see sometimes the references where they pulled things, and that's
we were talking about
kind
that.
of like, oh, that's a nod to this or that's a nod to that.
Yes. So together, this ragtag crew sets out to do the unthinkable, overthrow the prince, free Mara's family and the kingdom from his cruel grasp. I love this because, again, it gets a little bit like I guess that's a theme for me. I like the girl power where it's, she's a nun. She doesn't have any particularly impressive skills. She's just someone who wants to do the right thing.
Yeah.
And I also like about this that the magic system is very much fairy tale in that with fairy tales, you just, there's a poisoned apple. Okay, great. I mean, not in this book, but like in general, or there's spells where you are asleep and the prince has to kiss you to wake you up. It's just accepted that this is like how things work. And in this case, the magic system is basically, if you know how to work magic and you use the right ingredients and the right amounts and you say the right words, boom, it works. It's just
it's
that
like
easy.
Anybody can learn how to bake a cheesecake if they follow the recipe.
Which is kind of magical on its own. Yeah, same thing.
Okay. Baking can be, there's an art to it, definitely.
There is. Which means our mother, who just completed her first sourdough, is super magical.
Yes, I knew that.
She is.
Yes.
Yeah. And our Aunt Kate. Anyway, very atmospheric. Kingfisher is a master at helping the reader really feel like the dampness in the forest and the squish of the mud under your feet and the scratchy wool scarf that the character is wearing. It's really good stuff. And it still is like, there's heart, there's humor, but still darkness, which I really like. So
I like the character already because she has flaws. I mean, not that being a nun is a flaw, but if you're a nun, you're not an adventurer.
She doesn't have a lot going for her.
Yeah, like very little skills, being forced to go on do these heroic tasks, and so she's not a Mary Sue from the start.
I also forgot to mention this. This is, and I put it in my notes, but I completely skipped over it. Where did it go? Hang on. So I found that in her other novellas, and even in this is a novel, but the men who are in this are not necessarily alpha men. These are not like, big, hulking, attractive, strong knights who like to smash and kill things. They're not deviously attractive or like super cunning. Instead, the male characters, like the knights or the paladins in these books, are just sort of forced into their circumstances. just kind of making the best of it, which we can all relate to. And I really liked that aspect of not having these stereotypical, like,
Yeah.
the knight who's going to save the day.
Like, I'm just a soldier. I go where they tell me, whatever.
Yeah. I
King
mean, they're
says
just,
go here, I go there. So
the knight in this book is basically, he's just a dude and he's just trying to get through. Anyway, I won't go into it, but fantastic characters. Your turn.
Good. Okay. So my third one, I just read this. It's called The Blacktongue Thief. And the author is Christopher Buehlman, Buehlman. It was first published by Gollancz, Gollancz, in Europe in 2021, and then in America by Tor Trade in 2022.
I love Tor.
Yeah, Tor has a history of all these fantasy books. I mean, they've been in it since the 60s or 70s, I think. So that's their thing, that they do, which is, it's good. It's brought a lot of fantasy to the masses, and so this book, The Blacktongue Thief, I should mention it's kind of like reading someone's description of their Dungeons and Dragons game, like their homebrew game, where they just sort of make up a world map and they name this place Holth, and they name this place Ispanthia, and they name this place Galardia, and it's like, okay, fine. And it's like the high schooler drawing a map and saying, okay, dragons be here, goblins be here. And so that it's kind of a homebrew kind of a book. So it was, and they call him that Blacktongue because he's from Holt, which is a country in the north. And you know how some dogs, like I think it's a chow, their tongue, it can be black or have black spots on it. And so people from Holt or wherever he's from actually have black tongues. So it's just like a genetic feature. It would be kind of like elves having pointy ears, and people from Wolf have black tongues. And so that's where he's from, and that's why he's called the Blacktongue Thief. Which is interesting. That's kind of an interesting world building quirk. Sure. Okay. And so I bought this off a recommendation on Reddit. I typed in, swords and sorcery suggestions. And this one was a popular suggestion that had a lot of, thumbs up for it. So a lot of good votes, and people liked it. And they're like, oh yeah, Blacktongue Thief, that was awesome. I got it on my Kindle, and I found the book was it was clunky to start. I started reading it 2 times, and then I put the book down. And then on the 3rd time, I started to get into it.
Was this the author's first novel?
No, I don't think so. Now, after I've looked at him on Amazon, and it turns out it's not his first novel, but I thought it was because of the way that he treated the treatment of the protagonist in the beginning. Was like, do you know who your protagonist is? It's almost like he didn't have the main character quite settled in his mind, and I'll get into that in a second. In fact, so this is what I wrote. This felt like an author's first novel because the protagonist starts out as if the author hasn't quite figured out the character yet. In some ways, Kinch Nishanik is a bumbling, Shaggy type from the Scooby-Doo series. Like he's a newly graduated thief from the Takers Guild, which is, he can't call it the Thieves Guild because that's actually another book series by Robert Asprin in Dungeons and Dragons land. But so anyway, he's from the Takers Guild, and the Takers Guild is a little bit like our current Department of Education, where they get students saddled with so much debt they're kind of indentured servants and have to pay back the guild for a really long time before the guild lets them off the hook. So it's like people paying student loans for 25 years to because of their learning, that going to the thieves college he went to. So it was kind of weird. Yeah, well, that's basically it. The Takers Guild. And so he's a newly graduated thief from the Takers Guild, but in some ways he's kind of a Mary Sue and seems to have ninja skills, which is weird. It's like, okay, you're a newbie or you're a ninja, make up your mind. For example, in the beginning of the novel, he gets arrested for doing something, kind of stupid. um, and then while he's in the, so like, why would a master thief let himself get plucked by the town guard? That's kind of lame.
Yeah.
But while he's in jail, he's able to use magic to bend the bars, escape his cell, and then he does this magic spider crawl on the ceiling to go into another cell and steal back his fiddle that somebody stole from him. And it's like, okay, so it's like, if you could get out of jail so easily, what's the point? So the beginning of the book also lacked direction. His guild wants him to follow a knight from Ispanthia, but won't tell him why. So he meets up with this woman, this female knight whose name is, what is it, Galva. And they spend a lot of time faffing about in town, and it leaves the reader kind of wondering, okay, well, when is this story going to get started? And finally, after they leave the town, the story starts to pick up and get interesting. They first go to a keep, which is kind of a big square castle, where a witch lives, and the keep is guarded by living ivy. So think Whomping Willow from Harry Potter. And then there's no front door like at ground level. It's at the top. And so you have to climb the ivy to get to the front door. But if the ivy doesn't want you to climb it, it's like, no, denied. That's kind of fun. And then they get into this keep, and it's like reverse gravity zone. And so the ceiling of the keep is actually the floor, which makes sense because that's where the front door is. And then they have to take these upside down stairs to
like
go
Escher stairs.
Yeah, it's very MC Escher, right? And so anyway, so then that's cool. That starts to get interesting. I mean, that's more like reading into someone's D&D campaign. Like, okay, that's cool. So, and then they gain a new traveling companion, a pretty young witch named Noragul, with whom the main character is very infatuated. So the story gets better because they go on and they battle a minotaur. They join a whaling vessel and fight a kraken at sea. So, and then they fight goblin pirates, and then they go off with an army to fight giants. So the intrigue of the story starts to deepen as the main character Kinch, like pinch, like stealing, I guess. Kinch finds out that the guild is at cross purposes to his new friend Galva and his now love interest Noragul. And so it finally, the story comes out where he's got to think about who he betrays. If he helps Galva and Noragul, he betrays the guild. And if he betrays the guild, then, Noragul gets killed. And the witch who is like teaching Noragul said, if anything happens to her, you're dead. I'm coming after you. And she's all powerful. So he's really in a hard place. So the authors put the main character in a difficult situation. Finally, about 2/3 through the book, you figure out what's going on. And so it finally, like, okay, I see what this story is about. But the whole faffing around in the town for the first, 1/5 of the book, it's like, why? I think it suffered a little bit from editing. They could have made the character a little better. They could have. There's so much stuff about the fiddle, and none of his interest in finding the stolen fiddle and getting it back has anything to do with the plot. Yeah, it's extraneous. So that, I don't know. This was actually rated pretty well on Goodreads. I think it got a 4.22 out of 5 stars.
Oh, wow.
With 30,000 people voting. And it's actually the first in a now series of, there's 2 Blacktongue Thief books. So he's gone on to write another one. So some people like it. I didn't like aspects of the main character. He's not likable because he's very crass. He uses the F word a lot. He swears all the time. The book has gratuitous sexual references, which I won't get into, but it's like, why is that in there? That's totally, gross and unnecessary. So some of it was off-putting, but eventually when the story gets moving, that's good. Also, I can say to his credit, the author writes some of the fight scenes just as well as Martha Wells does for the Murderbot series.
That's impressive. Yeah.
So it's like, oh, okay, finally you've got skill. Thank you for showing us. It's like the beginning, you didn't show us that. And now he can kick ass. So I think he's sort of taken a long time, the author has, to figure out who his character is,
What do you think is the main attraction? Like, why is this book so beloved despite the flaws?
It seems very modern in its take of fantasy, because he uses a lot of, modern slang and swear words and stuff. And I don't know. It seems it's exciting. It does eventually get moving, and like I said, it's similar to one of those like YouTube videos where you're following along someone else's D&D campaign. And
Got
so
it.
it's
Yeah.
interesting in that way. So I think people who are playing D&D now would totally get this. And if you're playing D&D as like a teenager or a 20-year-old, there's going to be some crass talk in your game table, like teenage guys do. And so maybe it's familiar in that way. I don't know.
Okay.
But in a book, it was unnecessary, and this is certainly not a book for children.
No. Okay. Yeah, you had mentioned
rated R for sure, definitely R plus. So
R plus, M for deeply mature.
It's like what's between R and X, because there's no gratuitous like a smut book would have gratuitous description, but it almost gets there. And so it's like, oh, what do you call this? It's like that was unnecessary, but
well, there you go.
Okay. So yeah, I don't know if I would read anything else by this guy. It was an experience. I mean, okay, I get it, but he's not my cup of tea, as it were.
Interesting. Okay, so my third book is, you don't know what it is because I didn't tell you because I changed my mind yesterday.
Okay.
This is, okay, bear with me. This is modern, and yet not. It is a retelling, and yet not. It is a YA, but also young adult, but can be read by adults, I think. This is Legendborn by Tracy Deonn, and I believe this was her debut. So this is a book that basically is like a modern Arthurian legend.
Yeah.
So I'll just read the synopsis here. 16-year-old Bree Matthews loses her mother in a very tragic accident. She is enrolling in a residential program for high schoolers at somewhere in North Carolina at some school, and it feels like a good fresh start for her. So she's on campus her very first night, and she stumbles into what looks like a magical attack. So she witnesses a flying demon feeding on human energy. And then she comes to realize that there's a secret society called Legendborn who hunt these demon creatures. There's also a teenage mage, a so-called Merlin, who notices her witnessing all of this. Like, she kind of like stumbles onto this into this incident, and so the mage is like, "Oh crap!" Men in Black, he's got to like erase her memory. So he gets a hold of her and he's like, "All right, stand still so I can like magically dazzle you."
Yeah.
Right. And it doesn't work on her. And he's like, what is happening? And she's like, "What is happening?" There's a lot of like, this is a bit YA. This is the part that's YA. Anyway, so where are we going with this? Because this synopsis is like all over the place. But trust, it's good. It's good. Determined to uncover the death of her mother. So she feels like there's magic society, but she also feels like there's something magical mysterious about the way that her mother died. And maybe there's a connection. She infiltrates this Legendborn group and tries to kind of uncover their secrets and what their ties are to King Arthur's knights. She's faced with a very impossible choice. She realizes that she has magical ability, and she can either destroy or try to take down this group or join them. And there's a huge plot twist. And this is a teeny spoiler. The timeline of this book jumps to Bree's ancestors. So Bree is African American, and it jumps to her ancestors who were slaves in the South. And that relates to why she has magic ability. So I'll just
Is it like a hoodoo thing or something?
She is not 100% African. I'll just say that.
Okay.
She has blood of slave owners in her. And so that's where she has this magical talent that's coming from. Anyway, while there's some really dark and disturbing topics and historical references here, I thought this was very, very good. There is a bit of a romantasy, which is not, she has two kind of love interests and she doesn't know which one to trust. And this is a 3-book series. And I don't think you figure out who to trust until the very end. Super twisty.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, super twisty, really a great book. I loved this so much that I sent it over to Tomoko in Japan to read when it was like, it hadn't been released there yet because I wanted her to read it right away. Yeah, just good stuff. This also had this is like one type of awards.
Yeah, it sounds like the kind of book where you'd read on the jacket, the blurb like, can't put down, a real page turner. But it does sound like it. It's hard to put down. Like you want to continue reading until 3 a.m. when you just like, no, I have to get up at 6 to go to work.
I'll tell you what the spoiler is, like the big catch later when we're not live, because it's, it's fantastic.
Good. Yeah. Okay.
Anyway, so that was Legendborn, all one word, by Tracy Deonn, Deonn, and she has since completed the series.
That sounds like a series I'd like to pick up. Actually.
Really? Okay, well, I'm not going to tell you the spoiler then.
Oh, okay. Yeah, thanks. Don't, because you've described it as a way that I can see there's a lot of good writing technique in it. Like the guy who wrote Elfstones of Shannara, I think he was really good at those kind of techniques of making it a page turner. Terry Brooks, I think was his name. And, cliffhangers like, oh God, you can't end the book here, and then make you wait 6 months for the next book or a year for the next book. So good author techniques. It sounds like there's a lot of good writing in that.
A lot of dark secrets. So there's kind of a dark academia vibe to this book as well, even though it's not college or university. There's a lot of secret society. We've been doing this for years and you don't know what you're talking about because you're nobody and you're also a girl and you're also Black. So, that kind of stuff. So.
Oh, okay. Right. Yeah.
Do we want to talk about
honorable mentions?
Thank you. I blanked. I was like, I
have a few honorable mentions. And for me, it's interesting because like what I said earlier about, here's, the 70s where Dungeons and Dragons happened. And then before that, there's things that obviously influenced, like Gary Gygax, the guy who made D&D, was a big fan of Conan the Barbarian, right? So that's in there. And obviously he liked The Hobbit because there's elves, dwarves, and halflings in it. And then books that are more modern that are definitely influenced by Dungeons and Dragons. And I don't want to just make this a D&D kind of podcast because it's not, but D&D seems to be really ingrained or linked to the whole swords and sorcery genre.
Yeah.
They both sort of feed off each other. So I'll go first and I'll mention my honorable mentions. So Conan the Barbarian, obviously, he's very.
This is a book that I would never pick up in a million years, and so I'm very curious to see what you have to say about this.
Well, so it's a series of short stories or little novellas written by a guy named Robert E. Howard, and I think he suffered from schizophrenia, and so when he was writing, he would actually hallucinate Conan the Barbarian standing behind him saying, "You must tell my story," and he being terribly frightened and frantically typing on his manual typewriter what Conan is dictating to him.
Good grief.
Yeah, I know it's scary that he had to suffer through that, but the stories are fantastic. So the stories occur in a fictional Hyborian age set after the destruction of Atlantis and before the rise of any historical ancient civilization. Excuse me a second.
I mean, all I know about Conan the Barbarian is like the movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger, which I don't think I even watched fully.
Okay. Conan, he's a Cimmerian, that's his race, which some literary critics have likened it to the ancient Celts. So, he's kind of maybe a Brian Boru character or some kind of an ancient hero.
Aaron's coughing. He's muting himself.
Sorry. So the Conan stories started coming out in December of 1932 in pulp magazines like Weird Tales. And so Conan has proved to be such a popular character that many other authors have also published Conan stories. Paul Anderson, Leonard Carpenter, Lynn Carter, L. Sprague de Camp, Robert Jordan, the Wheel of Time guy. He actually is the author of this Conan novel. So, yeah, it's interesting. John Maddox Roberts, Harry Turtledove. So lots of people have picked up the Conan character and sort of run with it. So another book, I kind of had a hard time getting into these, but if you remember our Aunt Trish, she had a boyfriend who was really interested in these Fritz Leiber books, and Fritz Leiber is the author. Yeah, in the 80s, and actually the books came out in the 70s, but the character is Fafhrd, which is kind of like a Norse Viking guy, and his sidekick, the Grey Mouser, who's like a thief. And so, like in the 70s, these books came out, like Swords Against Deviltry was one. Swords Against Death came out in 1970. And they, again, were similar in the Conan genre, where they were short stories of various lengths. I've tried reading it several times, and I just can't really get into the author's voice very well, but he's immensely popular, and a lot of people really like it. So,
one thing that we really didn't touch on today was dragons.
I suppose.
I mean Hobbit had a dragon.
Hobbit. Yeah. So, but Swords and Sorcery doesn't necessarily have to have dragons. But
that's true.
I think there's a series called The Dragon Riders of Pern that was very popular in the 80s, I remember. And there's a lot of these Dragonlance books, which are published first by TSR, which owned Dungeons and Dragons, and then now by Hasbro Wizards of the Coast. And so there's all kinds of books in the D&D world that obviously would have D&D monsters like dragons in it. I think there's one more that I wanted to mention. Speaking of D&D stories, this is the very famous one, the Drizzt Do'Urden books by R.A. Salvatore, and it's called the Dark Elf Trilogy. It starts with Homeland, and then the next book is called Exile, and the next book is called Sojourn. Drizzt Do'Urden is a male in a female hierarchy society, so matriarchal society, and men are treated like scum. They're all the women are nobility and learning magic and witchcraft, and the men are kind of like guards and street sweepers and stuff. And they're all dark elves, and they live in the Underdark, which is very, very deep caverns under the surface. And Drizzt learns a fighting technique, kind of like Miyamoto Musashi with two swords. And so he's very good, and he becomes sort of like a guard at a palace or something. And all of the dark elves, the women worship a goddess called Lolth, and Lolth is the Spider Queen. And if Lolth doesn't like you, she sentences you the afterlife, where you become kind of like a centaur, but you're a person on top and have a spider body. And it's kind of a miserable afterlife. And then they're called Driders, and these Driders sometimes guard the vaults of the queen or that kind of thing. So Drizzt in the beginning book escapes this society where men are almost slaves, really, and he breaks tradition, and nobody leaves the company, kind of thing. And so his people chase him, and then he comes to the surface where dark elves are never seen, and he kind of goes his own way and becomes an adventurer. And most people think that dark elves are evil, but he's actually a nice guy, and he doesn't want to be evil. I think that's why he leaves. He doesn't want to do all these evil things that these Lolth worshipping witch ladies want him to do. He doesn't want to do their bidding anymore because he doesn't like hurting people, and he's not an evil guy. So, and he was a very famous, well-loved character. So, the R.A. Salvatore, Drizzt books were very popular, I guess, in the 80s and stuff when they came out, and they're still popular. There's like 18 books in the series now because people just love this character. Oh yeah, it's good. But anyway, so that's a sword and sorcery one, but it's definitely based in the D&D world. And a lot of people might like to pick that up if they haven't seen or read the Drizzt Do'Urden books yet.
Will you send me your notes so that I can put that in the description for everybody?
Oh yeah, sure thing. You bet.
My honorable mention, I cannot remember that phrase today, is a book that I've read, and it is called The Stardust Thief by Chelsea Abdullah. And this is basically a retelling of 1001 Nights or Aladdin, but the main character is a girl who is a criminal, and she saves the prince. What I loved about this is like there's genies, there's adventure across the sands. Really, really good book, and it is a series. I'm waiting for the second book to come out, and it's been years. My God, it's been 3 years, and I'd love the second book to come out now. But yeah, basically.
No, sorry, go ahead. I'm looking in my library because I want to mention something that's very similar, I think.
Oh, yeah. Anyway, this was just fantastic, like the magic and the kind of the Arabian themes to this. So, because we've talked a lot about like Arthurian legends and some Celtic themes, or just whatever inspired Tolkien. But this is, a really fun desert kind of adventure. So, highly recommend.
For reading on the plane in December when I came out for Christmas, I bought. Well, I got a sample of this book. I don't know how well you can
The Crescent Moon Kingdoms.
Yeah, okay. And the
Saladin Ahmed.
Saladin Ahmed, and it's also a Gollancz book. The publisher is Gollancz, and it's very similar to what you were just saying. It's basically sword and sorcery in an Arabic world.
Yeah.
And I got through the sample, and I'm like, oh, I gotta read this because this is really interesting. So
how fun!
I like it.
Yeah, I really like genies and that sort of thing to read about too. Right. That's a fun.
It's sword and sorcery and magic with an Arabic twist. Very Aladdin kind of a.
Yeah.
Sort of. It's cool. It's nice to see sword and sorcery in a different genre. Not the Western, traditional dragons and knights kind of a thing.
Exactly.
So yeah, it's this genre is so wide, and anyone can find something that they like, whether it's The Hobbit or whether it's the Arabic themed kind of the Crescent Moon Kingdoms.
Yeah.
Saladin Ahmed.
You can, or modern. We talked about modern stuff today too. Modern fantasy.
Modern, or classic 20th century, early 30s kind of stuff. There's a lot out there for people, and anyone can find something. I'm confident that they'll dig. So
100%. Well, I think that's a good way to end this and wrap up the episode. So
okay, very good. I enjoyed that. That was fun.
Super fun. Let me just say goodbye to everybody. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. If you have a favorite fantasy or swords and sorcery book that we didn't mention, I would love to know what it is. Let us know in the comments, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Bye.